Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another exciting and informative video on our YouTube channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we want to thank you for watching. On to today's episode, I will be diving into the reason why the United States of America is making a fundamental geopolitical error in the continent of Africa by singling out the country of South Africa. South Africa is the most important country in the continent with regards to geopolitics, one of the most powerful economic house in the region, and if not the most powerful economically. South Africa has a huge voice in the global south and is the most vocal country that is pushing the African narrative. Most African countries are observing how the United States of America is dealing and interacting with South Africa. Most nations in the continent feel if South Africa can be bullied, considering its economic situation, the most powerful and outspoken country, for those other countries in the continent who are at the lower end of the food chain will be thinking differently, and why they should be engaging with other countries that the US consider are the geopolitical foes. In this episode, I will be diving into more specifically where does the United States of America South African strategic partnership goes from here. So without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it.
The bills say it would require a full review of the bilateral relationship between the two countries, given what they claim to be South Africa's recent positioning and coordination with America's adversaries. The proposed legislation that could be called the US-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act cites numerous allegations to make its case that the government's publicly stated non-aligned stance is inconsistent with its foreign policy actions, directly favoring US adversaries China, Russia, Hamas and Iran. South Africa's alleged support for Hamas, including a call between International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor and the group's leader Ismail Haniyeh, while taking a hardline stance against Israel. It cites what it calls a politically motivated case at the International Court of Justice, while on the domestic front, accuses the ANC-led government of a history of substantially mismanaging a range of state resources, threatening the country's people and economy.
The African National Congress of today is no longer the party of Nelson Mandela.
This was Representative James chairing a meeting last September of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa.
While the South African story is one of hope, reconciliation, and determination, the ANC today is motivated by perpetuating a system of elite capture built on corruption and increasing government dependence through its National Democratic Revolution, and while clearly deepening relations with the Chinese Communist Party and Putin's Russia. As a black man, I carry the knowledge of my own country's historical burden of inequality. And as a conservative black man, I understand that hard work, perseverance, and getting a shot pays off. That is clearly not the case in South Africa's ruling party, where nearly 30 years into ANC rule, the South African people are more dependent than ever on a state that fails to consistently provide even the most basic services and provides bad policy.
Please have a seat.
If enacted, the bill would give the executive 30 days to release an unclassified determination explicitly stating whether South Africa has engaged in activities that undermine the U.S. national security and foreign policy interests.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has strained the relationship between the United States of America and South Africa, almost to the break point. Though ostensibly non-aligned, South Africa has also maintained strong diplomatic ties with Russia, and its relations with China are similarly robust with regards to their own perspective, as evident by the last BRICS summit hosted in Johannesburg, going back to August of 2023. While South Africa's economy faces increasingly troubles, the country remains a political and economic powerhouse on the African continent. As the United States of America revamps its African strategy, should South Africa's importance in the global order and also as one of Africa's leading economies, like we've pointed out, outweigh its sharp geopolitical difference with Washington? Or should the United States drastically reevaluate its relations with South Africa? Most African countries are observing this particular relationship, considering different bills in the U.S. House Senate to regards to punishing the country of South Africa.
The United States is South Africa's second largest trading partner, and 21% of South Africa's exports to the U.S. enjoy non-reciprocal duty-free trade status. I've said before, and I will say again, South Africa has a choice in what partners to prioritize, but so too does the United States. I believe it entirely appropriate to scrutinize the conduct of our important partner when the risks compromising our strong, dynamic, bilateral relationship are at hand. In closing, it's my belief that South Africa is currently at an inflection point, and I view the next several months as critical in demonstrating whether it will put our important partnership back on track.
His proposed legislation would have to be processed through committee, then be voted on by the full 435-member House, before moving to the Democratic-controlled Senate that would require at least 60 votes for passage, were it to be taken up, before heading to the White House for the president's signature, none of which is guaranteed.
If you talk about South Africa today, South Africa, a democracy that is one of Africa's most politically powerful nations and the second largest economy after Nigeria, South Africa is widely viewed as a natural leader on the African continent. It also has a key voice in the global south, like I've pointed out. It plays a leading role in the African Union, and it's also a member of BRICS groupings, which also include Brazil, Russia, India, China. Now it has expanded to Algeria, to other countries, and Iran and other countries that are interested with regards to growing their market share globally. South Africa's relationship with the United States of America have never been smooth. Washington was slow to impose sanctions on South Africa's apartheid regime, and for many years designated the African National Congress a terrorist organization. According to experts, based on our own analysis, the ANC, as it's referred to now, has now led South Africa since 1994. Although there has been periods of positive cooperations between Washington and Pretoria in some areas, ties have been especially strained since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February. Pretoria has officially been neutral on the war, but its decision to go ahead with joint naval exercise with Russia and China around the war's first anniversary was widely criticized in Washington. Things got even worse with regards to May, when the United States of America's ambassador in Pretoria accused South Africa of supplying weapons to Russia. War effort. Now, South Africa has firmly denied this allegation, but pressure to punish it for its ties to Russia and also China remains high. If you look at other aspects with regards to the United States of America's approach in the continent, as most African countries observe, America singling out South Africa to punish them with regards to any aspect is completely wrong in terms of geopolitical engagement. Most nations in the region are observing the approach that the United States is using towards South Africa. This has given them a bad taste with regards to engaging with the continent of Africa.
I testified in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the subcommittee on Africa, and I discussed Russia's growing influence on the African continent and how that influence affects U.S. national security interests there. The main point that I wanted people to take away was that Russia has strategy towards Africa, but is also acting very opportunistically to advance those strategies. It is preying upon weak states, fragile states, and states in a state of political turmoil. That's where Washington needs to be really focusing its efforts to shore up both democratic principles in those countries, but also taking steps to combat the kinds of tactics that Russia is employing there around propaganda, disinformation, and meddling in the local political environments. And so this comes at a very timely opportunity where we have seen Russia acting in a more overt way, trying to bring those political relationships into the light of day, using the Ukraine war as a kind of wedge between Africa and the West. So right now I think is a critical moment for Russia's strategy to break its international isolation as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. So it's really important that Washington be paying attention to what's going on the continent as directed by the Russians right now. I think my biggest takeaway from the hearing was how aggressive tactics to roll back Russia would actually have potentially adverse consequences for our relationships in Africa. Our African partners have been telling us that they don't want to be made to choose between the United States and Russia. They don't want to be the subjects of a kind of Cold War competition between these two great powers. And so I think the word of caution that I offered to the Congress is as much as we might be trying to combat or roll back Russian malign influence, we have to be sensitive to the local context that we do it in, sensitive to the needs and the agency of our African partners, and not treat them as pawns in a great power competition.
In recent months, Republicans and Democrat senators questioned whether South Africa should also be allowed to participate in the long-standing U.S.-African Trade Investment Agreement known as AGOA, which took place in South Africa's arrangement most recently. So, how much should the United States care about South Africa's warm relations with Russia and China? How much attention should South Africa get from the United States overall in its foreign policy? What should be the key elements of the U.S. smart use of foreign policy strategy in the terms of the global African community? These are the issues. If you look at the nations like Eritrea that are moving a lot closer to Russia and also to China, these are some of the reasons why the United States does not get it. If you look at other areas, most analysts in the United States of America have clearly indicated to the Congress that Africa does not want to be pawned into this particular geopolitical issue with Russia on one side and China on one side. The US should bring its A game. Let's listen to what these experts have to say, and we will join you on the other side.
I testify before the House Foreign Affairs subcommittees on Europe and Africa on the subjects of Russia's activities and influence in Africa. Particularly through military engagement, we see Russia developing a lot of relationship with various countries. But these relationships are not new. Russia, in the days of the Soviet Union, stood alongside a lot of African countries as these were fighting for independence from colonial powers. Now the Russians are back trying to call on their friends across the continent. This, of course, puts an onus on the United States, especially when we consider the Ukraine war. We saw during the UN resolution vote, not all African countries voted the same way. Why did the countries in Africa not align themselves with the West or with the United States? This is because the US is not engaging Africans directly. It's because they're going through the former colonial powers. That is a disadvantage. The House Foreign Affairs Committee should consider changing the way that the US approaches Africa. The US need to seek to understand Africa's views and respect their agency and their choices, and then use that to propose better deals to the Africans. The United States should also give African leaders the consideration that they deserve. When African leaders visit Russia or China or any other part of the world, they are received with all the honors befitting their ranks. When they come to America, they rarely are seen at the White House. That means Africans feel disrespected by the United States. So when the US comes calling for their support, the US does not get it. The US should not be in the business of chasing shining objects across Africa, whether it's China or Russia or any newcomer. The US need to focus in its long-term goal and objective and engage Africans accordingly.
What I don't also understand with regards to the relationship, as most African nations will consider that South Africa is an important member in their community and the most strategic voice in the region. South Africa is an important African economy. In fact, the United States of America South Africa's trade and also investment relationship is quite robust. Over 600 US companies operate in South Africa. In all conduct, I think that the framing we often hear in the United States of America South Africans as a gateway nation to the continent is an overstatement, but I do not deny the importance of the commercial relationship than economic relationship as well. But more importantly, the United States needs to care more about South Africa, as other countries are observing, because South Africa has an outside voice on the international stage and for many years speak with certainty or also moral authority because of the extraordinary struggle against apartheid and the sacrifice that so many South Africans made to have a more just society. So when they speak, many more Africans will listen to what South Africa is saying. This is a clear indication that Washington doesn't get it. By singling out this particular country, it makes the continent of Africa to look at the United States of America as a bully in some aspect. The other piece are also where I think that the United States of America's kind has a natural affinity and interest. The question here is, South Africa is an independent country that is free to make its own choices. I wonder why the United States of America consider that they are able to tell South Africa the direction that the country should take in the 21st century. Consider South Africa's history and as the most important voice. So the notion that the South Africans should be directed or pinpointed to where and who they should interact, as we've heard in the congressman's statement, I think is a fundamental error in the geopolitical arena in the United States or around the world. The current policy is not working, it's not engaging, it's no more seen as a partner that is there for the African people's interest. It's important for the US to review its strategy in the continent, otherwise China, Russia will continue, and the European Union to an extent will continue to take advantage of the US fundamental failures in several areas across the region. We want to thank you for watching. Let us know in the comment section what you think with regards to South Africa's interaction with the United States of America. If South Africa has the right as its independent nation to make its own strategic choices, let us know in the comment section. And we want to know from you if African countries should come out forward and also point out that now is the moment that it should be considered as equal to deal in terms of bilateral trade, organization, investment in a whole lot of areas. We want to thank you for watching. If you are new to this channel, we'll encourage you to check some of our informative video on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.